Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first full-length episode of my podcast, Under the Lemon Tree. This episode will be all about episode 7, Driftmark, and wow, I have a lot of thoughts. I don't know where to begin, but I'll just start with my initial reaction. This is probably my favorite episode so far, and I know I'm not the first one to say that. And I feel like I've said that about pretty much every new episode of House of the Dragon when it's come out, because they just feel like they keep getting better. And the show just continues to surprise me and impress me. And I anticipate I'll keep saying this was the best episode yet as the season goes on. What I really loved about this episode is that it felt like the culmination and the release of so much of the tension that's been building up throughout the entire season. Especially episode 6 felt very tense with the war to come and the tensions between the houses. We got to see a lot of infighting. The war, in a sense, began in that yard. It felt like, we had the children donned in black and green of their respective sides of their family and of this war already, having it out with each other, and it just felt so tense with all the just intense emotions of this upcoming civil war. And this felt like the episode where all that tension was finally released, and it was just so satisfying to watch. And we got to see so many of the scenes that have been teased from the very beginning of the show in all of those trailers of the show. We got to see the moment that Alicent grabbed the dagger and tried to maim Rhaenyra. We got to see the moment Corlys Velaryon said, history doesn't remember blood, it remembers names. Just so many moments that were in the trailers and that we've been looking forward to, and that I've been looking forward to throughout the season, were in this episode. So I really appreciated how this was just such an explosion of tension and of energy, and it really feels like the war, in a sense, began in this episode. The first blood to be spilled in the Dance of the Dragons was spilled in this episode, with Aemond losing an eye and Rhaenyra getting cut. It's like someone from each side of the war has already had some of their blood spilled, and the tensions are higher than ever, and it's very exciting to see. So I figured the best way to go through this is just go through it chronologically. I have some notes here. I have some things I want to talk about in the episode, some of my thoughts, some of my questions, my overarching analyses. So I think the first thing is I'm honestly very surprised that Otto was able to be reinstated as Hand. I understand that Larys killing, his father and his brother allowed Otto to come back, and that's why he did it. But after Viserys fired him, it seems like the whole reason he fired him was because he felt like Otto couldn't give him unbiased advice because he was so intent on getting his grandson on the throne, which is true and is an aspect of Otto's manipulation that we've seen from the beginning. I mean, it's the reason that he coerced Alicent to seduce the king in the first place, and so that she could bear his sons and that they could be the rulers instead of Rhaenyra. It's like he was designing this plot from the beginning just to undermine Rhaenyra's claim. So from the very beginning, we've seen that Otto has this ulterior motive and this desire to manipulate the king and manipulate the system in any way to get his grandson on the throne. And that was the whole reason that Viserys released him and fired him. So it's not like that's changed. Who's to say that Otto wouldn't still want to be trying to get his grandson on the throne, of course. Like, that still seems to be his goal. I don't see why it wouldn't be. So it was very surprising for me to see that Viserys actually seemed to agree to have Otto reinstated. And of course, I'm sure that's probably because of Alicent. She probably manipulated Viserys into eventually agreeing to have Otto back as Hand. It would be interesting to see, or to try and think of what Alicent could have said because that honestly was very surprising to me. I did not expect Otto to actually be brought back again as the Hand, but here he is, and we'll see what he does back in this position. If he continues to manipulate and scheme, and what he does next. So I'm curious to see that. I really like seeing Helaena being able to see the future, being sort of a prophet or a person, able of prophesizing in that way. We saw it very explicitly in the last episode when she foretold that Aemond would lose an eye in order to get a dragon. And it's interesting just how underestimated she is. People don't seem to listen to her babblings. Her mother was very uninterested and seemed displeased with how interested Helaena was, in the bugs. And she's mumbling these prophecies, and Alicent really's paying no mind to her. And then here at the funeral, Aegon calls her an idiot and thinks that she's just spewing nonsense. But she seems to be telling the future. And when she talks about spools of green and spools of black, I love that she was just foretelling this battle between the blacks and the greens. And I think that's really fascinating. It reminds me of other characters, we've seen who can see the future. It reminds me of Melisandre reading the flames in Game of Thrones, or the dragon dreams that King Viserys would have. So I wonder if Helaena is a dragon dreamer, or has dragon dreams just like her father. I was also surprised to see that Helaena is betrothed to Aegon, because as we saw in episode 4, Alicent seemed very resistant to and, disgusted with the Targaryen custom of incestuous marriages. It's something that it was part of her, critique of Rhaenyra, saying, I can't believe you got with your uncle Daemon, you Targaryens do have queer customs, is what she said. But so I'm surprised that she agreed to have her own children be betrothed to be wed. It seems like something that she would be against. But I do understand that as a wife of a Targaryen, and just as a person who seems very intent on upholding tradition, how she would be swayed, perhaps by Viserys, into believing that betrothing their children is the best course of action. So it was a bit surprising to see that they're betrothed, but I can see how that would have come about. Part of me can't help but feel some sympathy for Aegon. He is just a young kid, like a teen kid, and he really just wants to drink and flirt with girls who clearly aren't interested. Like, he doesn't seem to have any ambition or any interest in the throne, yet everyone is, or his mother especially, is pushing him towards that future just because they believe he should, simply because he's a man, and that he should take the throne over Rhaenyra. And it's something so heartbreaking, because, even in the last episode, here Alicent barges in on Aegon and says, Rhaenyra is going to try to kill you if you take the throne. And then Aegon says, well, then I won't take the throne. And Alicent says, you need to want to take it, though. And it's just so interesting, and it's just one example of how these children have been shelved with the desires of their parents, and the boiling war and the animosities between their parents have been pushed onto them. And I guess that idea is really what leads tensions to boil in the climax of the episode, which we'll get to that. Aegon is not by any means like a good kid or like the most pleasant person, but it's just sad to see that he really just wants to, have fun and be himself and be a kid, and he's being pressured, especially by his mother, to have this ambition for the throne and to usurp Rhaenyra and go into this war, when he doesn't really seem to have much of an interest in that and isn't really thinking about it. There's nothing that's shown that he has the qualities or the traits that would make him a good ruler, or has any kind of interest in it. Whereas in contrast, Rhaenyra has shown those traits from a very young age. She originally didn't have many ambitions for the throne, but she was always very precocious and very inquisitive. And once she was named heir, she became very interested in the council meetings, and she would try to offer her advice of what to do in the stepstones, and she just wasn't listened to and wasn't taken seriously, perhaps because she was young, but also because she was a woman, and people didn't take it seriously that she was named heir, and saw it as really a temporary thing until the king had a son. And it's sad, because I feel like Rhaenyra was just very underestimated as a child. And while she showed leadership qualities and the potential to become a good ruler, which is something that Viserys even admitted once he named her as heir at the end of the first episode. He says that he should have done this all along, and he shouldn't have spent her life wishing for a son, kind of neglecting her and ignoring her in that way, and that he was wrong for doing that, and that she should have always been his heir. So I think Rhaenyra has always shown these traits that could potentially make her a good queen and a competent ruler, and she has the interest in it as well. Whereas Aegon, who's being upheld as her competitor for the throne, and in the minds of a lot of people in the realm, should be the ruler over her simply because of his gender, yet he's not someone who has any interest in it or has displayed any qualities that show that he would even be good for the job. And to me, that's a really fascinating detail, because it shows just the influence of the deep-seated misogyny in this society. Even someone who has been named the rightful legal heir and someone who has the qualities to potentially make them a good ruler is being overlooked and not taken seriously simply on the basis of her gender, which is very, very significant. And I think that says a lot about Westeros. And I find that just a really fascinating detail, how they've chosen the creators to, or the writers, how they've chosen to contrast the characters of Rhaenyra and Aegon, even when they were both young, to show, I think, their different capacities for being able to rule, and the different ways that the realm is reacting to them, and what that says about gender politics in this world, and how perceptions of gender are so significantly influencing what people think about these two people, these siblings, being pitted as rivals for the throne. Moving on, in the funeral, I love this little moment where Jace and Aemond share a look over this little fire at the funeral. It's just, there's no love or tenderness in it. They just kind of give each other a side eye and move on. And I love that, because it seems like a piece of foreshadowing, because these are the two that are going to have it out later when Aemond loses his eye. And the fact that they had this look while Aemond is wearing green and Jace is wearing black, it was just another beautiful piece of foreshadowing, showing this war that is to come. And I appreciate the similarities that are being drawn, the parallels and the circumstances surrounding when Rhaenyra and Daemon first reunited after being apart in episode 4, and when they're reuniting again now in this episode. Because in episode 4, Daemon had been off fighting in the Stepstones and had been gone for 4 years. And, he returns to court. Rhaenyra's kind of following him through the throne room, eyeing him, and, happy to see him, clearly. And that image and those circumstances are mirrored in this episode as well, when Rhaenyra and Daemon haven't seen each other in 10 years, and he returns, and here Rhaenyra is walking around, all these people kind of eyeing him across the room. I appreciated that. It gave this sense, that these are the same people. Rhaenyra and Daemon still have that chemistry and that attraction, and just, I love those parallels being painted there. I thought it was really interesting detail, too, that when Rhaenyra and Daemon made eye contact, sort of a somber version of her theme began playing. The theme we hear, when she first, we see her first ride Syrax, to go to Dragonstone in episode 2, I believe that is. Just we hear that theme, just a somber version of it, when her and Daemon make eye contact, and that theme kind of intensifies, gets louder when Viserys looks at Daemon. And it's really interesting. It seems like they're trying to highlight, again, that dynamic between Rhaenyra and Daemon, and how perhaps time hasn't deadened that and hasn't made their feelings for each other fade. If anything, because of the grief they're both experiencing now, it seems to draw them together. Which is an idea that was mentioned in the Inside the Episode segment, the idea that Daemon and Rhaenyra's chemistry is as strong as ever. And I definitely thought it was funny when Viserys called Alicent Aemma. I'm glad I had the subtitles on, because I didn't exactly register that until I saw the name Aemma on the subtitles, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, did he just call Alicent Aemma? And that look on her face, she was just, she was just like, really? Like, are you kidding me? Like, that was pretty funny. So that felt like a bit of a moment of levity, and I thought that was pretty funny. So moving on to when Rhaenys and Corlys are speaking after the funeral in High Tide. I thought it was interesting seeing this conversation they were having, because it seemed to really reveal what their motives are. It seems like Rhaenys, more than anything, just wants her kids to be happy and safe. And this was a concern we saw in her back when Rhaenyra and Laenor were, betrothed. And we had that whole conversation back in episode 5. She was speaking to Corlys about how afraid she was for Laenor, because she was saying, listen, like, we're putting our son in danger by having him go and marry Rhaenyra. She's aware of her son's sexuality, and she was very afraid for him, whereas Corlys didn't seem to share that fear or understand that. And in this conversation here, in this episode, Rhaenys accuses Corlys of just wanting power and just being so eager to have the power of the throne on his side, and kind of that seems to be a lot of the reason why he wanted Laenor to marry Rhaenyra in the first place, to get some Valyrian blood on the throne. And this really is a breaking point for Rhaenyra, and for Rhaenys. Rhaenys accuses Corlys of wanting power so much, even to the cost of his own children, and which is such an ominous thing to hear her say, because she's sort of foretelling what's to come. Corlys's desire to have his blood on the throne, which led Laenor to being betrothed to Rhaenyra. It led him to feeling trapped. As a gay man, he couldn't pursue the relationships openly that he wanted to. This is a society that is not tolerant of his sexuality. He can't express it openly. He, as the eldest son in his family, is expected to inherit High Tide, so he's expected to marry and have children. He's expected to have this life that he's not interested in having. Yet, Corlys didn't seem to have a problem with that, because, again, having him marry Rhaenyra and have children could get Valyrian blood on the throne. So it's very ominous when Rhaenys says this, because she's kind of proven right by the end. She says Corlys wants power even if it costs her children, and in their mind, at least, this desire, it costs Laenor his life. Of course, we know that Laenor doesn't actually die, but Laenor's father, his deep desire to have his son, pursue power on the throne for his sake, leads him to feeling so trapped that he agrees to this plan he's concocted with Rhaenyra and Daemon to fake his own death, to run away. It's so devastating to see how in this society, that is how far and how extreme someone would have to go to feel at peace and to feel free. This is what Laenor felt like he had to do in order to truly live as himself and be happy, which is so heartbreaking to think, that he lives in a society that does that, and that makes him feel trapped in that way. So I really appreciated this conversation between Rhaenys and Corlys. It revealed a lot about their characters and their desires and how that leads to conflict and tension between them. And I also found Rhaenys' words to be very ominous when we consider Laenor's fate at the end of this episode. And how far he was willing to go, to fake his own death just to be free of the situation that his father Corlys put him in at, the cost of Laenor's happiness, just to make Corlys happy. How far Laenor had to go to be free from that. So Rhaenys' words very much came true, I feel like. So moving on to Rhaenyra and Daemon on the beach. I, of course, really appreciated this scene as a Rhaenyra shipper. I had been eagerly awaiting their reunion. Every time they're apart, I just want them to reunite and see each other again. So, of course, I very much look forward to this. And it did feel like their chemistry was just reigniting, and almost as if it had never gone away, I love how we see Rhaenyra really bare her soul in this moment with Daemon, and she expresses just how lonely she feels. And just like Aemma Darcy says in the Inside the Episode segment, she says that Rhaenyra feels very abandoned. Her mother died tragically. She feels like her father kind of betrayed her and abandoned her by marrying Alicent. She felt abandoned by Daemon. She felt abandoned by Alicent. So she feels very alone and very abandoned. And I love that she just flat out says that and bears her soul to Daemon and says, I can't believe you left me, and look at what my life has become without you. And it's sweet, almost what Daemon says. He says, I spared you. You were a child. And that just brings confirmation to what I, and I'm sure plenty of other Rhaenyra shippers, suspected after episode 4 and after that brothel scene, was that the reason Daemon couldn't go through with what he was doing with Rhaenyra was because of his care for her. I believe that, and I think him saying this in this episode proved that, because he realized that what he was doing was taking advantage of her, someone who was a child and sexually repressed and vulnerable in that way, and then he got her, in a vulnerable situation and seduced her, and he seemed, or at least my interpretation of the scene at the time, was that he recognized how wrong he was for doing that, and how manipulative that was, and how he cared for Rhaenyra so much that he couldn't bring himself to do that. And in a way, I almost find that kind of sweet, because I think it shows deep down just how much Daemon does care for her. And I think him saying just those few short lines in this episode confirmed that. Him saying, I spared you, you were a child. He stepped away and understood that, Rhaenyra deserved better than what he was doing to her, and didn't deserve to be manipulated in the way that he was doing to her in that moment. So I really appreciated seeing that confirmation of his character and his intentions in that line. I also love seeing just how much Daemon sympathizes with Rhaenyra's pain. He admits that Rhaenyra can't mourn for Harwin the same way that he can mourn for Laena. And I found that really, really touching. At first there seems to be that bit of fire, that bit of anger, where Rhaenyra is like, my life has become droll tragedy without you. And Daemon's like, well, what do you think of my life? We're both going through this horrible grief and this horrible suffering. And Rhaenyra says, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you have to go through this. And Daemon says, well, at least I can mourn her, And I think this was sweet. This was a moment of them really bonding and really reconnecting, and it proves just how much I feel like they understand each other. And I think that's the reason Rhaenyra feels so much solace with Daemon, especially in this moment. They're both grieving, they're both very hurt, and they both feel very alone. And I think they find each other in this way. And it makes it a very powerful, very fiery reunion between them. So it's beautiful to think that they don't feel quite so alone anymore when they're together again. I think my only critique really, well, just like many others have said, I really was not pleased with how dark the scene was. From what I understand, there was a tweet sent out by HBO Max where they explained that this was an artistic choice, having the scenes be so dark. But it was a shame because I feel like I couldn't appreciate the nuance of the actors' expressions and of their performances. I feel like I couldn't really fully appreciate this scene between Rhaenyra and Daemon until I saw fans re-uploading the scene where they had turned up the brightness a bunch. You know, there's just small nuances just in their facial expressions and the way that they look at each other that I feel like I really just could not see in the scene. Even I had the brightness like on my computer turned all the way up and I could hardly see them except for their, you know, their shining silvery blonde Targaryen hair, which was one of the few things I could see in the moonlight. So that was a shame. You know, I understand if you're trying to set a certain mood by having it so dark, if you're trying to have it be very moody or broody or, you know, very mournful, but it's a shame that I feel like we couldn't have these actors' performances fully appreciated if we can't see them. So I would say that was my one critique, and I wonder if that was one reason I didn't feel the full impact of this scene until I rewatched it, or until especially I rewatched it with the fan edits turning up the brightness. So I also feel like I felt a bit of the disorientation that people have felt from the time skip. You know, I've heard critiques from fans about the time skip since the beginning of the show. Since the beginning of the show, I've heard people talk about how the time skips are really disorienting. And I didn't really feel that at first, early on, you know, when the time skips were just a year or two at a time and weren't so big. And when it was a bit easier to infer what things might have happened in that time, I didn't feel as much of an issue with it. You know, like the time skip where now Alicent has 2-year-old Aegon and is pregnant, and I feel like I didn't struggle getting on board, I guess, with short little time skips like that, where it wasn't hard to see what had happened in that time. But in this major time skip, the 10-year skip between 5 and 6, I think this was the first time I really felt disoriented by a time skip, and I think it's just a combination of how large of a jump it was, but also because of the change in actors. Granted, I do think the casting is incredible. I think all the new actors that were chosen resemble the characters physically, and they also, you know, act like and speak like and seem like the characters and have their mannerisms. Like, it's not hard for me to believe that Olivia Cooke is older Alicent, and Emma Darcy is older Rhaenyra, and, you know, it's not the actors and it's not their performances. I think the casting is wonderful. I almost just wish as a viewer I had more time to adjust to them, you know, like, as well as I think, you know, for example, of Rhaenyra and Daemon on this beach, as well as I think the actors did at portraying their reunion and the emotional significance of that for these characters, and were able to portray their chemistry that still burned for each other, and I felt that and I saw that. I almost feel like if we had more time to see, you know, older Rhaenyra with Daemon, even just another episode of them perhaps speaking to each other or seeing each other, I think it would have helped me as a viewer to adjust a little bit more to it, you know? So, I'm not saying I wasn't sold on it, not sold on their chemistry. The actors did an incredible job. I just almost wish I was given more time as a viewer to immerse myself in the time jump and in the new actors and get used to them. And I know I'm definitely not the first person to say that. I know other fans feel that. It is interesting that, yeah, now I'm feeling the effects of the time jump a little bit, which is a shame because I know we're about to get another time jump in episode 8. Seems like all the children of Rhaenyra and Alicent are going to be aged up and recasted. So we'll see if that same disorientation is still there. So that's to be seen. Moving on to the moment when Aemond tames Vhagar. Again, I think it's a shame how dark this scene is because I couldn't fully appreciate it. But just in general, I love the design of the dragons in this show. I love how Vhagar looks and sounds ancient, and she is. She's the oldest and biggest dragon alive, and that's really sold, I feel like, in her design. Even just, her scaly dragon skin, it looks aged. It looks like she's been scarred through war, and she has these holes in her wings, and the way that she growls and roars, I can feel her age, and the fact that she's such, an ancient creature, and she's seen and experienced so much. Even just her design, her appearance, and her sound, I feel it conveys that. So I really love that. They very effectively portrayed her as a beast and something that is not easy to reckon with, And that's something I appreciate more broadly just about this show in general. It feels like every dragon really is its own character. Every dragon has its own personality, its own appearance, its own mannerisms, its own sound and growls and roars. I love that so much. The dragons feel very distinct and fully fleshed out. And I liked that a lot because that is something about Game of Thrones that was more challenging, that all the dragons kind of looked the same and acted the same, and it wasn't very easy to distinguish between them. I found myself definitely mixing them up at times. So I really love that this show took the time to give them each distinct looks and distinct personalities. The ride itself, I love that Aemond struggles to ride Vhagar at first. Not only does it feel more realistic to what it would be like for a person to try and tame a huge dragon like this, and with the fact that he's a kid too, it seems realistic that he would have this struggle. It was kind of a moment of levity in the episode, in after a very dark and somber, scene of a funeral, seeing young Aemon just clenching for dear life onto this rein of this dragon and just screaming in terror and trying his best to stay on. I loved it. It was hilarious. It felt like a moment from Harry Potter or something is what it reminds me of, seeing on a wizard riding on a broom for the first time or playing Quidditch or something. I don't know. I loved it. Such a moment of levity and felt very realistic. If someone tried to tame a dragon, it seems like this is what it would be like. And I loved the moment when he was able to take control of Vhagar and get more comfortable on the saddle and control her with the reins. And when he had that building comfort and confidence in riding Vhagar, you hear just this version of Daenerys' theme trickle in, and hearing her theme, it makes me tear up every time. I remember right in the opening of the first episode of House of the Dragon, when we see Rhaenys on Syrax, you hear this version of Daenerys' theme just trickling in the air, and it brought a tear to my eye. It reminds me of the first time we see Daenerys ride her dragons and how it's just such a moment of power and victory, and it's very emotionally impactful for me every time. It was very beautiful, very clever use of her theme. In that moment we saw Vhagar just with her wings spread out under the moon, just chef's kiss. Beautiful. I'm sorry if I sound a little raspy. I'm trying to... Alright. So moving on now to the fateful scene, the fateful climactic scene. Just like I said in the beginning, this is the moment the first blood is spilled in the Dance of the Dragons. And it's just an incredible scene. This really felt like the fateful moment when all of the building tensions finally came to a head. Just like Emma Darcy said in the Inside the Episode, This felt like the moment that the greens and the blacks were solidified in a way that they hadn't been before. This feels like the moment the lines are really being drawn in the sand. You know, here's the sides these characters are on in this war, and here's why, and here's what they feel, and here's what they want. And this episode really, really accomplished bringing that clarity and just being this explosion of tension. It was just so fascinating to watch. Again, to me, kind of feeling bad for Aegon here. He was just kind of drinking himself silly at this funeral. Granted, it seemed like he kind of was just drinking because he was bored. You know, he was yawning at the funeral, and he was just downing cup after cup, and, you know, Otto picked him up, like, by the scruff of his neck and told him to go to bed when he was, like, passed out drunk. And then here, in this scene, presumably he's just been woken up just like everybody else, and he's probably, you know, kind of drunk or hungover, and here his mother, Alicent, comes over and just slaps him across the face, and he's like, what did I do? And she's like, you weren't here to protect your brother, Aemond, you know, you were too busy getting drunk or whatever. And it's like, what was poor Aegon supposed to do? Like, he was just sleeping, you know, like, it's so easy, I guess, to point fingers at your oldest son and be like, you're supposed to protect your brother. But, like, not even the Kingsguard, whose job it literally is to protect them, was there to protect Aemond. So, like, you can't get mad at your son, Alicent. Like, I felt kind of bad for Aegon. And just like others have said, the moment that Alicent demands that the eyes of one of Rhaenyra's sons is taken as retribution for Aemond's eye being taken, it very much had the same energy, the same vibes as when Cersei made a similar demand in Game of Thrones. Again, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen Game of Thrones. Please skip forward just like 30 seconds. But the moment when Cersei demands for Sansa's wolf to be killed after, you know, a similar kind of incident in fighting with the children happens. This is just a moment where Alicent is really showing her inner Cersei. You know, she's become this she's very vengeful in this moment. She quite literally, you know, wants an eye for an eye. And it's very interesting to see. Kind of like Otto said, you know, I don't know if I expected to see this in Alicent. You know, she definitely isn't the same kind of quiet, kind of meek, obedient girl that she used to be. She's gonna show when she's angry, and she's gonna flex her queenly powers to do what she perceives as justice. So, and that kind of brings me to the fateful moment when she grabs that dagger and tries to maim Rhaenyra, or one of her sons. You know, it's interesting that my second time watching this episode, I felt myself kind of sympathizing more with Alicent than I did originally. You know, because what she says when she approaches Rhaenyra, and Rhaenyra says, you know, you've gone too far. Alicent says, you know, what have I done other than what's expected of me? Which is fair, you know, and I felt some sympathy for Alicent in this moment, because she's someone who all she's ever done is what she's told to do. And what has it gotten her? You know, it got her son to lose an eye, and it got her stuck in this marriage with this king who she, you know, doesn't love or isn't attracted to, and she's stuck as just bearing his children and is trapped in this castle and has to have his heirs and raise them, despite the fact that this isn't something clearly that makes her happy, and this isn't what she wants, but she sees it as her duty. You know, at first she did what her father told her to do, and she was kind of a servant to him, and she had to seduce the king despite what she wanted, simply because it's what her father wanted. And then she had to, you know, be there to assist the king or beckon at his every call. And it is heartbreaking to see that Alicent is someone who was always, you know, obedient to the system and acted in a way that was expected of a noble lady. You know, she followed the rules, I guess you could say, of this society. And what did it get her? You know, it left her feeling very lonely and very isolated in this castle, and trapped in this marriage, and trapped with these, you know, young children when she was just like a young teen girl. And it's heartbreaking, you know. And Alicent's a perfect example of how broken this system is, you know, because even when people, you know, supposedly, you know, try to live within the system or try to do what they're told or try to, you know, build their life off of that, it doesn't serve them well at all. You know, look what it left with Alicent. It left her alone. So I can understand her frustration, because maybe she thought by following the rules she would, you know, be happy. But that's not what it got her at all. But the way that I see it, you know, this is a system that hurts everyone. And I think that's a big lesson I'm definitely getting from the world of Song of Ice and Fire more broadly, but definitely from this show. The idea that this feudal system and this deeply misogynistic society is something that hurts everyone. You know, it hurt Alicent, someone who tried to follow the rules of this society and was left alone and trapped. It hurt Rhaenyra. Again, just like she talked about earlier, Rhaenyra felt alone too. It robbed her of her mother. It robbed her of her best friend, and, you know, the connection she had with her father before him and Alicent got married. And it robbed Rhaenyra of the ability to, you know, marry someone who she loves. You know, most people in this society can't marry who they love. It robbed Laenor of the ability to love who he loves and be with that person and be himself and express himself and be true to his sexuality without, again, going through something really drastic and faking his own death in order to find that freedom from the limitations that this society has put on him, you know? Like, this seems like a system that really, it hurts everyone. The only difference is that some people choose to twist this system for their own benefit, whereas others just simply try to tolerate it. And I think that's one reason why I see Alicent as a bit of a hypocrite, because she does criticize Rhaenyra for not, you know, submitting to duty and honor and sacrifice the same way Alicent has. She seems to feel resentment for Rhaenyra in that way, and she seems to see Rhaenyra, you know, as an entitled and spoiled, you know, royal who uses her royal powers to get away with having bastard children and having people just, you know, not speak about it. And, you know, she's able to get away with that. And she saw Rhaenyra as, you know, having children who were able to get away with taking her son's eye. And she sees this as just Rhaenyra abusing, like, her royal power and her privilege to her own benefit. But my counter argument to that would be that Alicent does the same thing, just in her own ways. Alicent uses her own royal power to her benefit as well. The only reason it seems like Criston Cole is alive is because of Alicent's royal power. You know, Criston murdered someone in cold blood at the royal wedding and struck the future king consort Laenor in the face. Like, Criston should have been executed, no doubt, or sent to the Night's Watch, or, you know, removed from the King's Guard, something. But he completely got away with it scot-free. And, of course, we never see exactly why that is, but I would bet you that Alicent's royal influence probably has something to do with it. She probably pardoned him because she saw him as an ally, you know. And Alicent, you know, in this scene, she cuts Rhaenyra, the heir to the throne. She wounds the princess. Like, if Alicent wasn't a royal, she would have faced very severe consequences for that. She could have even been, you know, executed. And you can say the same for most people in this story and everyone involved in this conflict, you know. Rhaenyra's sons would have been punished or even executed for taking the eye of Prince Aemond if they weren't royals. You know, Rhaenyra, wouldn't have been able to have these bastard children and get away with it for so long. You know, it seems like most of these characters, if not all of them, benefit in some way from royal privilege and use it to their own advantage. So I did see Alicent as a bit of a hypocrite for accusing Rhaenyra of benefiting from her royal privilege when so does Alicent, you know. And kind of going back to the idea of everyone being a victim to this system and the ways that Alicent is a victim. You know, she feels all this resentment for Rhaenyra for, you know, getting away with having bastard children and getting away with the things she does just because she is a princess and the daughter of the king and the heir to the throne. And while Alicent, you know, has always been a very traditional woman in this world and followed the rules, it seems to me that Alicent shouldn't resent Rhaenyra. She should resent her father and resent the system. You know, she should resent the system that she tried so hard to live by for not, I guess, rewarding her for that with, you know, not feeling so alone. And she should resent her father because I see her father really as at fault for most of this happening. I know a lot of people blame Viserys, and I definitely think he plays a part in this. You know, you could say that if Viserys married Laena, like he was supposed to, and like everyone told him he should, this probably would have never happened, a lot of this, you could argue. But I see Otto really as the main cause of a lot of this. And it's because if Otto wouldn't have propped up Alicent as a suitor for Viserys and pushed her to, you know, seduce him and be around him in his time of grief for his wife, you know, Viserys probably would have married Laena, you know, and Alicent is so afraid now because she's trapped in this situation where, because her children are rightful children of Viserys, whereas Rhaenyra's children are bastards and Rhaenyra is the heir to the throne. You know, just like Otto told Rhaenyra before he left King's Landing after he was fired in episode 5, simply by your sons, you know, existing, they are a threat to Rhaenyra's claim, and Rhaenyra may try to kill them, he claims, in order to secure her claim to the throne. But the thing is that the only reason Alicent is in this situation in the first place is because of Otto. Otto was so ambitious from the beginning to get someone of his blood on the throne. If it wasn't for his meddling, Viserys probably would have never married Alicent. If it wasn't for his meddling and his manipulation of the king and of his daughter, she could have married some other lord somewhere else, you know, and been far away from all of this succession madness. She could have preserved her friendship with Rhaenyra. She could have gone off somewhere else and had children that aren't in any way related to the crown, and she would have never had children whose lives could have been threatened by Rhaenyra or by this upcoming succession war, you know? So the only reason she's in this situation, I believe, is because of Otto. So I see him really as the main villain and the main orchestrator in this, and I feel like Alicent should resent him for that. I feel like in a lot of ways Otto ruined Alicent's life. His own ambition for the throne forced his daughter into a situation where now she's terrified that her children are going to get murdered in this upcoming war. And now her friendship with her former best friend, Rhaenyra, is just destroyed. And it's just heartbreaking, you know. Alicent really is a prime example of the way this system just is corrupt and doesn't work. Because even when people try to follow it, like Alicent, and try to do what they're told, and they think that that's the way and that's the right thing to do, it doesn't help them. It only hurts them. The same way that this system hurts everyone. The same way that this system hurts Laenor, because he can't be with who he loves without taking extreme action. The same way it hurts Rhaenyra, because she had to marry someone who she knew could never truly love her and have the kind of relationship with her that she wants. And she had to, you know, have these secret relationships and these bastard children, because that was her only way to find companionship and love. And it's just devastating. This system, it robbed Laena of her life, and it robbed Aemma of her life, and it hurts everyone. And I think that was definitely a big takeaway that I take away from the whole series, but definitely from this episode especially. By bringing all these conflicts to a head, it really highlights to us just how broken and how corrupt this feudal system is, that it hurts everyone, that it was able to drive even best friends like Rhaenyra and Alicent against each other and drive them to war, which is really heartbreaking because they had such a pure and such a beautiful relationship and a beautiful friendship, and it got destroyed by this system. So in a system that makes everyone feel sad and feel lonely, it seems like the only difference is, some people are brazen enough to defy it. And I think that is the thing that I really adore about Rhaenyra, and is a reason why I really love her. She sees this system and she's not afraid to defy it. She has these relationships outside of her marriage in order to find fulfillment, and her husband have this very kind of progressive conversation where they agree to have this open marriage because they understand that's the only way they're going to be able to find fulfillment in this system that leaves them sad and lonely. And I appreciate how Rhaenyra seems to be a figurehead and this trailblazer for this ability and this person to have the ability to defy this system. She proclaims that once she takes the crown, that she'll create a new order, an order where women can inherit the throne, a new order. And I appreciate how Viserys seems supportive of that change as well, because when he's having this conversation with Corlys Velaryon in episode 5 about the future, when Rhaenyra inherits the throne, he proclaims that Rhaenyra and Laenor's child, regardless of gender, the firstborn child, will inherit the throne after Rhaenyra. So it seems like Viserys is trying to set a new precedent and is trying to change at least one part of the laws and the customs of this world to make it more inclusive to women. And I do really appreciate that. It is one big, I think, redeeming quality of Viserys. Granted, he still doesn't have the most progressive views. In episode 4, Daemon confronts Viserys and says, you and I, brother, we worked our way through every brothel on the Strait of Silk when we were Rhaenyra's age. What's the big deal with Rhaenyra, if she wanted to do the same? And Viserys says, it's because we're young men. She was just a girl. And Rhaenyra confronts him with the same thing. She says, Father, if I was born a man, I could, father as many bastards as I want and go to all these brothels and no one would blink an eye. And Viserys is like, yeah, that's true, but you're a girl, so these are the rules you have to abide by. So I'm not saying Viserys is this perfect figurehead of the possible, progressive, more gender inclusive future. But I do admire the fact that he's willing to work to change the rules of succession, at least, by making Rhaenyra his heir and proclaiming that her child, regardless of gender, her oldest child, will inherit the throne after her. It seems like he's trying to create a bit of a new order in that way, and I love Rhaenyra for being at the center of that and the front of that, and wanting to create that new world and being willing to defy this system that ultimately makes everyone feel unhappy and lonely, and is willing to carve out her own version of happiness in it. So with my love of Rhaenyra, I was so devastated for about 2 seconds when I truly believed that her and Daemon killed Laenor. And I was just so heartbroken first time I was watching this, when I was watching their wedding and everything. I couldn't fully appreciate it, as this Daemon shipper. This was the one thing I had been waiting for. But when I believed that the only way that it happened was by murdering Laenor, I was just crushed. So it was the best moment ever when Laenor, when we saw Laenor and his shaved head getting on that boat. I quite literally, I paused the episode first time I was watching it and jumped up and just screamed for joy. I was like, oh my goodness, thank God they didn't kill Laenor, because I was like, I knew I would never forgive them. I knew I would hate them forever. And I was devastated because I didn't want to hate them forever, because I really do like Rhaenyra. So I jumped for joy from the relief to know that they didn't actually kill Laenor. Granted, they still killed some random innocent guy, which is obviously very sad and devastating. But nobody in this world and in these shows has clean hands, you know. And that's something I really love about it. They're all very morally gray. They all are corrupt in their own ways, while at the same time, for the most part, they're all very sympathetic in their own ways as well. I love how George R. R. Martin is able to craft such morally gray characters, because I think those are the most interesting and the most fascinating, because they feel the most like real people. So that is my review and breakdown of episode 7. I hope y'all enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this episode, and definitely my favorite one so far. I really look forward to seeing what's next, and I look forward to seeing when this war full out begins. I know we're going to see dragons fighting dragons. It's going to be something very intense. I'm very excited to see what's to come. And I hope you all enjoyed. I hope y'all will stick around next week for next week's review and breakdown of episode 8. You can follow me here on YouTube, on Spotify, on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter, all under the tag @TheSpringDream. And I hope to see you all next time. Thanks for stopping by.